Wyoming Territory, December 1872. The snow was falling hard and fast when Asa Ellison spotted the wagon, half buried in the drift near the edge of his pasture. He pulled his duster tighter around his shoulders and nudged his horse forward, squinting against the wind. Something was wrong. He could feel it like a stone in his gut. As he drew closer, the shapes became clearer. A woman, sitting up straight in the back of the wagon, clutching a blanket around a small child. Another girl, a bit older, sat curled at her side, knees drawn to her chest, face red from the cold. The wagon was empty of supplies and the horses were gone. "Ma'am," Asa called out, dismounting. The woman blinked at him, her lips pale and trembling. "Please," she rasped, "my girls." "I got you," Asa said quickly. "Can you walk?" The woman shook her head, barely able to hold her own weight. She looked exhausted beyond reason, eyes sunken, skin gray. The younger girl in her arms looked barely conscious. He didn't ask any more questions. Asa scooped up the little girl first, wrapping her in his coat, then came back for the older one. She clung to him without a word. The woman tried to stand but staggered, and Asa caught her before she hit the ground. "My name's Asa Ellison," he said as he helped her into the saddle. "You're coming with me. It's just a mile that way." She nodded once, her voice lost to the cold. By the time they reached his cabin, the storm had swallowed the sky. Asa had the fire roaring before he even got his coat off. He laid the girls near the hearth, covering them in every blanket he had. The woman sank to her knees beside them, arms trembling as she held them close. Asa crouched down. "What's your name, Winona?" she said after a moment, her lips barely moving. "Winona Lark. My daughters are Phoebe and Pearl." Asa looked to the girls, then back at her. "How long were you out there?" "Since yesterday morning. My husband died last spring. We were staying with his brother's family. They told me I wasn't their responsibility anymore." Her voice cracked. "They said I needed to figure something out on my own, then they left us." "In the snow?" Asa's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice even. "They will not get the last word on you. You are safe here." Winona looked up at him, her eyes brimming. "Thank you." He nodded once, then stood. "I'll make broth, get them warm from the inside." The next few days were quiet. The snow kept falling, but the girls got stronger. Phoebe, the eldest, was 7 and spoke little, but watched everything. Pearl was 4 and clung to Winona's skirts like a shadow. Asa gave them space, fixing fence rails in the barn or chopping wood when the weather allowed. But each night, he made sure their fire stayed strong and their bellies full. Winona moved slow but steady, helping where she could. She insisted on mending his torn shirts, and after the 3rd day, she started baking bread with what little he had. Her hands were skilled, and even when she was tired, she smiled at her daughters like they were the only light she needed. One evening, Asa came in from the barn to find Pearl asleep on a pallet near the fire, and Phoebe curled up with a book he'd forgotten he owned. Winona was at the stove, stirring something that smelled better than anything he remembered eating. "You do not have to cook," he said gently. "I want to," she said without looking at him. "We cannot repay you, but I can at least do this. You do not owe me anything." She turned then, wiping her hands on her apron. "I do not understand why you stopped, why you helped." He stepped closer, looking at her in the firelight. "Because no woman and her children should be left to freeze in the snow. Because I saw you out there and something in me knew I could not ride past." Her eyes searched his, and something in her shoulders softened. Later, as the girls slept and the fire burned low, Winona sat in the rocker by the hearth. Asa sat across from her, hands around a mug of coffee. "My husband's name was Daniel," she said quietly. "He was a good man, kind, but we had nothing when he passed. And now? I do not know what comes next." Asa looked at her carefully. "What do you want to come next?" She hesitated. "I do not know. I only know I want my girls safe and warm, and not to feel afraid every time the wind howls." He nodded. "Well, this place is not much, but it is safe. You all can stay as long as you need." Her eyes met his again, and this time they held. "Thank you, Asa." He tipped his head. "You are welcome, Winona." In the days that followed, the snow eased. Phoebe began to hum again while she helped set kindling. Pearl laughed when Asa lifted her high to hang dried apples. Winona's cheeks grew rosier, and she began to walk with strength again. And in those quiet hours over coffee mugs, shared glances, or when their hands brushed passing in the narrow kitchen, something gentle stirred between Asa and Winona. Not loud or rushed, but steady. Like the snow melting off the eaves, like spring waiting just beneath the frost, they did not speak of it. Not yet. But when Winona caught Asa watching her while she braided Pearl's hair and he did not look away, she smiled, and he smiled back. The wind had softened by the end of the week, no longer screaming across the valley but settling into a low, constant hush. The drifts against the barn still reached high on the south side, but paths had been carved by Asa's boots, by Winona's smaller steps, and where the girls had trudged through to feed the hens or scatter seed for the jays. The world felt quieter now, not just from the snow's muffling, but from something else, something beginning to settle between them. Asa was splitting black birch behind the cabin when he heard the crunch of footsteps. He turned to find Winona standing nearby, her shawl drawn tight, cheeks flushed from the walk. She didn't speak right away, just watched his hands work the maul into the round. "I used to help Daniel with that," she said, her voice even. "When he hurt his wrist one winter, I did most of the splitting myself. Took me days." He rested the maul against the stump. "You want to try?" She shook her head, smiling faintly. "Not today. My palms are still raw from scrubbing out that kettle." He bent, brushing wood chips from his trousers. "You're not expected to do all that, I know," she said. "But I need to. I need to feel useful again." He nodded, not arguing. Her eyes were clearer than they'd been that first night, tired still but with a steadiness that hadn't been there before. "Phoebe asked me this morning if we'd be leaving soon," she said after a pause. "I told her I didn't know. I think it scared her." "Do you want to leave?" Asa asked, keeping his tone level. She looked out at the trees where snow clung to the branches like icing. "I don't want to uproot them again, not unless we have to." He waited, letting her sit with the thought. "I've been thinking about sewing again," she said. "I used to take in mending back in Kansas. Sometimes made shirts for the rail men when they passed through. If I could get fabric, needles, thread, I could trade." "There's a dry goods store in Medicine Bow," Asa said. "It's a day's ride, but I make the trip twice a season. Next time I go, I'll bring back what you need." She straightened a little. "I'd pay you back. You already are." "You've made this place warmer." She blinked, caught off guard. "Asa!" He didn't move closer, just let the words land where they would. Then he picked up the maul again. That night, after the girls had gone to sleep, Winona stayed at the table, a length of torn muslin spread before her. She was stitching by lantern light, her brow furrowed in concentration. Asa sat nearby, oiling the latch on the front door. "Phoebe told me she wants to learn her letters better," she said without looking up. "She said she likes the way you read aloud. Said your voice sounds like the river when it's not in a hurry." He chuckled, rubbing the oil into the metal. "That a compliment?" She meant it that way. "She's sharp, quiet but sharp." Winona nodded. "She was always her father's shadow. Learned early to keep her thoughts close." Asa set the latch down and leaned back in the chair. "And Pearl, she's mine," Winona said, a hint of pride in her voice. "All feeling, all heart. She cried over a broken spoon once." He smiled, watching her fingers work the fabric. "You keep them steady." She looked up then, met his gaze across the lamplight. "Some days I feel like I'm just pretending to know how." "You don't look like you're pretending." She held his eyes for a long moment, then glanced back at her stitching. "I've started thinking about spring," she said. "I know it's early, but I was remembering the garden I had once. Tomatoes, sage, sweet peas along the fence. I miss the smell of it." "There's space here," Asa said. "Soil's good once the frost pulls back. You could grow anything you like." She didn't answer right away. Then quietly, "I never thought I'd find a place again where it might make sense to plant roots." He didn't press her. Just let the quiet wrap around them like a second blanket. The fire burned low, the logs collapsing in on themselves with a soft hiss. When she rose, she folded the muslin carefully, smoothing the edges. "I'll see to the girls," she said. He nodded. Good night, Winona, she paused at the stair, looking back once. Good night, Asa. The door creaked shut behind her. Outside, the wind had gone still entirely, and from the porch, the stars were sharp and endless. Spring was a long way off yet, but beneath the snow, the ground was waiting. In the third week of January, the sun began to rise earlier, its light cutting long gold bars across the kitchen floor before the frost had time to lift. With it came a shift in rhythm. Asa began checking his traps again, returning by noon with rabbits or the occasional fox. Winona took to boiling lye soap in a kettle behind the house, sleeves rolled to her elbows, arms red from the steam. On the porch, Phoebe practiced her letters on a slate Asa had carved for her, while Pearl sorted pebbles into lines and circles, humming tunelessly. On a morning when the sky held a pale, washed-out blue, Winona stepped into the barn, her boots crunching softly over the straw. Asa was working on the wagon tongue, the old one cracked where the cold had split it clean through. He looked up when she entered, wiping his hands on his trousers. "I wanted to ask about the fence near the far pasture," she said, brushing back a strand of hair the wind had pulled loose. "I saw a break in it yesterday walking with Phoebe. Looked like something came through from the woods." "Could have been elk," Asa said, standing. "They come down when the snow's deep. I'll mend it this afternoon." "I'd like to come," she said. "If you don't mind the company." He studied her for a moment. "You sure?" "I've been inside too long. Besides, I want to learn what keeps this place standing." "Feels like I should understand that if we're to stay through spring." He nodded once, then picked up an extra scarf from the wall peg. "Best wrap this around your ears." "Wind's worse out that way." They walked the ridge trail in silence, the only sound the crunch of packed snow and the soft creak of Asa's leather harness. He carried a coil of wire and a sack of tools over his shoulder. Winona kept pace beside him, her breath visible in the cold. At the fence line, she crouched with him, watching as he unspooled the wire and ran it between posts. "How'd you learn all this?" she asked, steadying a post as he fastened the line. "Worked rail lines first," he said. "Then wrangled cattle for a man near Rawlins. Learned fences, hooves, hands all at once. Bought this land 6 years back." She pressed her gloves to her thighs, then looked out past the tree line. "Why here?" "Because it was quiet and no one came looking for me." She glanced at him then, but didn't ask more. He twisted the wire taut, then leaned back on his heels. "I was married once," he said, not looking at her. "Only a year. She got sick. Nothing the doctor could do." Winona didn't speak, letting the wind fill the silence between them. "I built the barn after," he continued. "Didn't want to hear the house echo anymore." She nodded, her face unreadable. "I understand." He turned to meet her eyes. "You do?" They stood there a moment longer, then walked the fence line together, checking each post until the sun dipped past the ridge and the shadows stretched long across the snow. That evening, while the girls played with corn-husk dolls on the rug, Winona sat at the table with her needlework, sewing tight, even stitches into a length of calico Asa had brought back from town days earlier. He watched her from across the table, the lamplight catching the edge of her cheekbone, the line of her jaw. "I noticed you don't sing," he said quietly. She glanced up. "Used to. Not much reason these past few years. You hum to Pearl sometimes." "When you think no one hears." Her lips parted, but she didn't answer. "I liked it," he said. She set her sewing down, folding the fabric neatly. "You surprise me sometimes, Asa." "How's that? You notice things." "But you don't press them." "I reckon folks talk when they're ready." She looked at him a long while, then reached for her tea, the tin cup warm between her hands. "I used to dream of a place like this," she said softly. "Not the cold maybe, but the steadiness of it. A place where I'd know what each day might hold." "You could stay," he said, his voice low and certain, "if you wanted." "I do want to," she said, "but I've made plans before and watched the world burn them down." He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table. "I can't promise the world. But I can promise I'll stand beside you if it tries again." Her eyes met his, and something in her face shifted, less guarded, more sure. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. Later, as Asa banked the fire and the girls were already breathing deep in their sleep, Winona touched his arm lightly. "Thank you," she said. "For the fence, for everything." He covered her hand with his. "You're not a burden here." "I'm beginning to believe that." He watched her climb the stairs, the hem of her skirt brushing the worn wood. Outside, the wind had changed direction. It carried the faintest scent of earth beneath the snow. February arrived on a hush of warmer winds, and the icicles hanging from the eaves began to drip slow and steady by mid-morning. Asa caught the sound while sweeping the porch, soft, rhythmic, like water tapping the world awake. He didn't say anything about it, but he noticed Winona paused outside longer than usual that day, lifting her face toward the sky as if listening for something she'd nearly forgotten. She'd started rising before the girls now, kneading dough or trimming quilt pieces in the quiet hour before dawn. Asa sometimes heard her humming low in the kitchen, a tune too faint to place. He didn't speak of that either, but he rose earlier too, just to hear it. One afternoon, while Phoebe read aloud from Asa's Bible and Pearl napped on a blanket of old feed sacks, Winona joined Asa at the paddock. He was brushing down the mare, a pale red thing with fading dapples, while the gelding nosed at the fence nearby. "I was thinking," Winona said, tugging her gloves snug, "we could trade baked goods for eggs or milk come spring. There's a family 2 ridges east, the Stillwells. I passed their place once." Asa glanced over at her. "You know them, not well. But I remember the wife had a good hand with goats. She might trade for bread if it's warm and sweet enough." He nodded. "I've traded with her husband, quiet man, fair." She ran her hand down the mare's flank. "It's strange how fast this place has begun to feel, not unfamiliar. You've made it different, in ways I didn't expect." She didn't answer right away, just bent to check the mare's hoof. "I thought I'd have to harden, get through it like a winter endure until it passed. But I don't feel like I'm waiting anymore." Asa set the brush aside. "You don't have to brace yourself here." Winona straightened, brushing straw from her skirt. "I'm still learning how not to." He let that hang between them, not trying to fill the space. The wind shifted through the trees, carrying the scent of damp pine and thawing ground. That evening, after supper, Phoebe sat near the fire twisting yarn into little cords, her tongue poking slightly from the corner of her mouth. Pearl leaned against Winona's side, half asleep, while Asa whittled a slender piece of ash into a spoon. "You always work with your hands," Winona said, watching the curl of wood fall to the floor. "I like the feel of it," Asa replied. "Lets me think things through. Some men talk when they need to make sense of something. I carve." She traced the rim of her teacup with one finger. "What are you thinking through now?" He didn't look up. "What it means to want something again, and whether it's fair to name it." She tilted her head. "Fair to whom?" "To the person who might not be ready to hear it." Winona shifted Pearl gently, settling her deeper into the crook of her arm. "And if that person already knows," he looked over then, his eyes steady, "then I reckon I'd stop carving. And say what I've been meaning to." She gave a small nod, her expression unreadable. "I'm listening." He set the half-finished spoon down. "I watch you move through each day with more care than most men take with their own land. You see what needs tending before anyone else does. And you do it without asking for thanks. That kind of strength's rare, and I've grown to lean on it more than I meant to." Winona's jaw worked slightly, as if she were holding a thought steady. "I'm not what I was before. I've been bent and broken in more ways than I can count. I don't need who you were, I see who you are now." Pearl stirred slightly, and Winona hushed her with a kiss to the crown of her head. Then she looked up again, eyes damp but clear. "I'd never planned to open my heart again. But it's already happening," quietly, "like snow melting." Asa leaned forward, his voice low. "Then let it. I'll be here when the thaw comes." She didn't speak, but her hand reached across the table, settling on his. Her fingers were calloused, warm, certain. In the weeks that followed, the mornings grew brighter. Pearl began to chase the hens in crooked, giggling runs. Phoebe started writing her own sentences, proud and precise. Winona stitched a blue curtain for the kitchen window, and Asa carved a second spoon. One night, as the lantern flickered low, Winona turned to Asa as they stood by the door. The girls had long since gone to bed. "I'm not just staying for the season," she said quietly. "This place, it's the first one that's asked me to stay without demanding something back." He stepped closer. "It's yours if you want it." "I do," she said, her voice steady, "and not just the land." Asa touched her face then, slow and reverent, as if she might vanish if he moved too fast, but she didn't flinch. She leaned into it, eyes closing for a breath. They didn't need to say more. The promise had already taken root. By early March, the creek behind Asa's barn began to run thin and fast again, its surface no longer hidden under ice but dancing with the sun. The horses shed their winter coats in soft clumps, and the hens laid more regular. Cold still clung to the mornings, but the light had changed. It lingered longer, touched everything with a warmth that hadn't been there before. Winona stood near the creek's edge one morning, Pearl strapped snug against her back with a shawl, while Phoebe lined up smooth stones along the water. Asa had gone into the timber with his hatchet at first light, clearing the old deadwood along the southern boundary. He'd offered to take Phoebe along, but she'd asked to stay with her mother instead, saying only, "I like the sound of the water." Winona watched her daughter crouch and sort stone from pebble with a carefulness that reminded her of Daniel's way, with tools measured and quiet. "You reckon you'll start planting next week?" Asa asked later when he returned, pine scent clinging to his coat and a nick on the side of his thumb. He was leaning against the doorframe of the cabin, watching her tie back her hair with a strip of muslin. "I was thinking I'd wait until the first wild crocuses bloom," she said. "Back in Kansas, they always came a few days before the frost gave up for good." He rubbed his jaw. "There's a little patch that blooms near the south slope. You'll see them from the ridge." Her eyes flicked toward him. "Is that a suggestion or an invitation?" He smiled. "An invitation. I'd like to walk that way with you." She folded the strip of muslin and tucked it into her apron pocket. "I'd like that too." They left the girls with Mrs. Stillwell, who'd ridden over to trade eggs and stayed long enough to offer her care for the afternoon. Pearl had cried when Winona first told her, but Phoebe had taken her sister's hand and whispered something that made her quiet. Winona kissed them both, then walked with Asa up the ridge trail, her hand resting on his arm when the ground sloped steep. The crocuses were just beginning to show tiny purple buds nosing through the old grass. She knelt beside them, brushing a gloved hand near the stems. "I didn't think I'd see them again," she said. Asa crouched beside her. "You were meant to." She looked at him, the breeze tugging at one loose strand of her hair. "I used to think the good things were meant for other people. That I was just someone who passed by them." "You're not passing by here," he said. "You've built something, you belong to it." She looked down at the flowers again. "I want to build more, not just a garden, a life, a home with you." He reached for her hand, his palm rough and warm. "Then let's do it. Slow and steady, just like we've done everything else." She leaned into him, and he wrapped an arm around her, holding her close as the wind stirred the grass around them. They were married in town come April, in the small clapboard church where Asa had once helped raise the roof beams. The preacher's words were simple, but Winona's voice didn't waver when she spoke her vows. Phoebe stood beside her, holding a sprig of sage and pressed yarrow. Pearl clapped after the final blessing, her curls bouncing beneath a bonnet Mrs. Stillwell had stitched special. They returned to the homestead that evening, a stew already simmering over the hearth, and the table laid with every dish Winona had learned to make since the snow thawed. Asa carved her a box for her sewing needles and tucked it beneath the bed they now shared. Winona hung her mother's apron in the kitchen and told Phoebe she could learn to mend come summer. By mid-June, the garden was green with promise carrots in neat rows, beans climbing the trellis Asa had built from cedar limbs. Pearl chased butterflies between the shoots, and Phoebe read aloud in the shade of the porch, her voice louder now, more sure. Asa came in from the field one dusk to find Winona at the table, her skirt dusted with flour, her hands kneading the last of the bread dough. She looked up, her face flushed and lit with the last rays of sun. He crossed to her, touching her cheek with the back of his hand. "I never thought peace would look like this." She turned into his palm. "It's more than peace, it's a beginning." They stood that way for a long moment, the sounds of the girls' laughter drifting in through the open window. The fire crackled low, and the scent of yeast and earth filled the room. Later, when the house had quieted and the girls were asleep, Asa pulled back the curtain she had stitched with her own hands and looked out at the darkened fields. Winona came to stand beside him, slipping her arm around his waist. "We are not broken things anymore," she said softly. He kissed her hair. "No, we're whole together." And they were, through years of rain and sun, planting and harvest, they built their life one day at a time. Phoebe grew into a tall girl with thoughtful eyes, always with a book tucked beneath her arm. Pearl danced wherever music found her, even if it was just the wind in the trees. Winona taught them to sew, to listen, to love without fear. Asa taught them to ride, to mend, to stand tall. Their home never grew grand, but it was always warm, always steady, and always full. And when the world turned quiet again each winter, when the snow came and the fire was lit and the wind pressed gentle against the walls, Asa and Winona would sit by the hearth, hand in hand, and know without doubt, without fear, that they were exactly where they were meant to be.